Well, hi there. Good afternoon. It is October 30th, 2019, journal number 211, T plus 211, transplant plus 211 days. If I'm wearing this red, if I'm wearing this red oversweater, you know I'm cold. It's one of the residual effects of treatment. Um, Seems like I'm always cold now, uh, more so than before. I'm trying to get warm, and this is the warmest kind of sweater of this kind that I own. And I apologize if I'm not making a fashion statement, or maybe I am making a fashion statement. I don't know. Um, if I seem a little distracted, I apologize. It's just that my community is on fire right now at both ends. We live in pretty much the center of our valley, Simi Valley. And right now there's a fairly large fire out by the Reagan Library, which is at the west end of our valley. And they're trying to knock down a number of smaller fires that are starting at the east end of the valley. So right now we're bracketed, which is never a good thing. Uh, but that's not what I want to talk to you about today. What I would like to talk to you about today are the three interviews that I just finished this afternoon, and they were great. I got to tell you, they were just incredible, all three of them, and they were very different. And I'll tell you why I think they're great in a minute. But before I do that, I want to publicly thank Dave Farrow for Brain Hackers, who was my first interview, and his show, The Brains Behind It. I'd also like to thank Mark Silverman, Mark J. Silverman, in his podcast, Mastering Midlife, for another wonderful, wonderful interview. And finally, I want to thank Audrey Strong and C. Lee Smith of Sales Fuel for their Manage Smarter interview this morning that finished off the triumvirate, the last 3 days of solid interviews. And all three of them were masterful. All three of them were a delight. And I'll be letting you know when those podcasts are available. They certainly were a delight to participate in. They were all different. They came at the process of being interviewed and interviewing very differently. There were three different areas of focus, obviously, because of the nature of, you could tell that from the nature of the titles of the different podcasts they were. And they were three very, very different styles. Although all three of them had things in common that I thought were worth mentioning. And I'll tell you why. Because what I've discovered is the more you're interviewed, the more you tend to find out about yourself. And when you're interviewed by somebody who's a pro at it, who's really good at it, they ask really good questions, and you sort of develop an appreciation for what those good questions, great questions, look and feel like. But more than anything else, they really help you on the road to self-discovery. Because if the interviewer does their job properly and the person being interviewed is as comfortable as I was, they lull you into a false sense of security and then sneak in a really difficult question, which forces you to dig deep, come up with an answer, recognizing that you're being recorded, and you want to make sure that the answer that you give is representative of who you are and how you feel and what you're all about. And that really helps in the process of self-discovery. So you benefit while they're trying to provide content for their audience, for their listeners or their viewers. And it was interesting because, two of them were pure recorded podcasts, but one of them is a podcast with video that'll also be on YouTube as well as, in the podcast content with the provider. So in that spirit of asking the right questions in order to get the right answers, it's really helpful to do the work ahead of time. I mean, if you're going to do the interview and you're going to be the interviewer, and, think about that. In many cases, we're doing that even without thinking about it. You don't have to have a podcast to be interested in other human beings on the planet. Certainly when you're engaged in a conversation and you're asking questions, for all intent and purpose, you really are an interviewer. It pays to think about yourself in that context, because I think you'll ask better questions. And if you're being interviewed, it's important to be a good interviewee, to be a good guest. And both require a fair amount of something else we've talked about many times before, and that is do the work. You got to do the work. If you're going to be an interviewee, then you've got to listen to the podcast. You've got to get a feeling for who your interviewer is going to be, what kind of questions they're likely to ask you. And perhaps more importantly, get a sense of who their viewers are, who their audience is, to try and understand better what their audience wants out of the interview. That's if you're taking all of this seriously. And I think that it's important that you do that. I think it's important that we all do. So you've got to know the audience. You've got to know the interviewer. You really have to know what you want to talk about, right? Our son, Ryan, does interviews all the time in which he's being interviewed for the most part because of his position with Insomniac Games and within the gaming industry. And when it comes to being interviewed, you want to stay on track. The interviewer wants to get questions answered that they're interested in, but you also want to get information out into the world that you're interested in. The good news for me is that while we were doing the interviews this morning, yesterday, and the day before, we were talking a lot about misfire, what to do when things aren't running on all cylinders, a book I just completed. And the great news is that there was a lot of interest in the book and what it's about and how it could benefit each of these three very different audiences. So that was exciting. And that was a good thing. So we could talk a lot more about what makes a great interview, but I think in the course of a normal life where you're not doing podcasts every day, where you're not on the internet every day, where you're not doing blog posts every day, I think that we can just distill the whole thing down into two basic statements that'll help us get through life a little bit better, a little bit more effectively, certainly with a little more interest or being a little more interesting. And that's ask better questions and give better answers, right? And I think that's one of the things that I was talking about that I meant, or that I should have stressed when we talked about interviewing yourself. So keep that in mind, I think. Ask better questions. Give more thoughtful, better answers. And to Dave Farrow, Brain Hackers, the brains behind it, Mark Silverman, Mastering Midlife, and Audrey Strong and C. Lee Smith, Sales Fuel, Managing Smarter. Thank you, guys. You made the beginning of this week just a joy, all three of you. It was so much fun and so exciting being with you and communicating with your audiences. Thank you very much. In the meantime, you guys stay well, take care. hopefully they'll get these fires under control. But with the winds what they are here in Simi Valley, which by the way means Valley of the Winds, I'm not sure that's going to happen. These are the worst winds that we've seen in the valley since we've lived here, and that's 45 years. So it's really a concern. Stay well, take care. See you again tomorrow. Bye bye.